Hello, Southeast. I hope you're doing well. We are heading into Christmas, Thanksgiving, all those holidays, and I love this time of year. I love the traditions. I love pretty much everything about it, even the shopping. I know it's crazy, but I just love this time of year. It does my soul good. However, I also know that for a lot of people, this time of year can be difficult. And there have certainly been seasons in my life where it has been difficult because we're going through grief, we're going through unreconciled relationships, we're going through just difficult times. And so we kind of have this weird dichotomy going where there's this incredible amount of joy, but sometimes the grief or the sorrow overwhelms us in this season. And so oftentimes when I think about that, I think about the Passover meal. So when the Israelites were being brought out of Egypt, out of slavery, they were headed into the Promised Land, and God gave them this meal. And there's different elements in the meal that kind of point to, ultimately it points to Christ, but it points to living a life with God, living a life that is surrendered to Him. And there's been different commentators on this meal. And so one of the commentators, his name was Hillel. He was a rabbi at the end of the 1st century before Christ, and then kind of when he was born. So kind of that crossing over the year 0. And Hillel was looking at this meal, and in the meal there's these two elements. One is karaset, which is this apple stuff, and it's very sweet to the taste. But there's also horseradish, and that's very bitter. And so Hillel, in the Passover meal, he took some matzah and he made a sandwich, and it's called the Hillel sandwich. And he put on the bitterness of the horseradish, and he put on the karaset, the sweetness of the apple stuff. And he said, this is life. And oftentimes in life, we can't separate the bitterness from the sweetness. We can't separate the grief from the joy. They go hand in hand. They mix together. And I think that this time of year especially, it's where that message is amplified in so many different ways. And so then the question is how do we move forward in our grief while holding on to the joy that we have? And I think that there's a verse in the Psalms that captures this idea. And this verse was written when the Israelites were in exile after they had been brought into the Promised Land, and they were exiled into Babylon. And here is the verse: how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And that's the question that you and I wrestle with. Like, how do we acknowledge our grief, be honest with our grief, and yet at the same time acknowledge the joy that we have in Christ? How do we do that? And honestly, it's a learning process. It's one of the ways that God sanctifies us. And so one of the things that I have learned going through grief, going through difficult times, and holding on to the joy is recognizing that God doesn't waste our sorrow. God doesn't waste our pain. If we recognize that Jesus came and He took on all of our sorrow, He took on all of our sin, the wrath of God, and He was sinless, and He took that on voluntarily, sacrificed His life for us. And then He was resurrected and glorified, is that we have that same life with us if we've surrendered our life to Christ. And so it means that we recognize that in our sorrow, in our pain, that God is doing something with it, that our sorrow and our pain, our grief, it unites us with Christ in some way, some mystery that happens, that in that there's this closeness that happens. Paul writes to the church in Corinth, and he writes it this way. He says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So our pain is, God is using this to prepare us for eternity. He's using it to sanctify us. It doesn't mean that we're not honest with our pain. It doesn't mean we're not honest with our grief. It doesn't mean that it's easy. We just recognize that as we're going through these trials, as we're going through our emotions, we recognize that God is using that, and He's using it to prepare for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And so he goes on to say then, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So I will be praying for you as you are wrestling with this season, with the holidays, with the cold weather, with the snow, with Thanksgiving and Christmas, that you hold these things in your hands well, grief and joy, as God uses both of those in this season. And as always, if you have anything that you'd like me to pray for specifically, just reach out and I will. And we have a prayer team also that we definitely go before Him in prayer. A couple things to know. This Sunday, we're starting a new sermon series, and we're calling it Is Well. And it really is part about what I was just talking about. Life can be incredibly tough at times. There are countless challenges that try to break us down. And yet at the same time, God remains faithful. He sustains us through all of our brokenness and all of our sin and through death. And so we're going to do a sermon series on how to sing praises in the midst of our grief. So I hope you can join us for that. And then the other thing is, make sure that you put on your calendar our Thanksgiving potluck. It's our annual Thanksgiving potluck. It's on the 24th and it's at 5 p.m. You can sign up in the lobby. Southeast, I love you. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and God bless you.